Hello, and welcome to I Am Dad Podcast with your fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell. 30 minutes of wisdom, information, resources, and nuggets to help you on your fatherhood journey. Or maybe you're just curious and want to hear some real talk about fatherhood, family, and the minds of men. Well, guess what? We got you too. Sit back, grab your pad and pen, and maybe even bring a little something to sip on. Enjoy 30 straight minutes of fatherhood, family, and fun with the Fatherhood Authority, Kenneth Braswell.
Welcome to I Am Dad Podcast. I'm your host, Kenneth Braswell. Thank you once again for joining us. We appreciate you so much. It has been a interesting ride with this podcast. And so we started it some few months ago with an eye towards just really bringing critical information to the field of responsible fatherhood and educating and bringing awareness to everyone else. And the response has been tremendous. And so thank you again. Sunday mornings at 8 a.m., a new podcast drop every week, always with a new special friend and or a new special brother or sister in the field that I've known for a long time, like this young man that's sitting next to me today, Dr. Jeff Gardere. For those of you who don't know him, he is America's psychologist. He is a board certified clinical psychologist, and he's also with Touro College of, and I practiced this word this morning, Dr. Jeff, so I won't mess it up. Osteopathic medicine.
Ding, 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 ding. You got it. You got it. Perfect.
That public New York school education comes through again, for me.
Got it. You got it.
He is also a board member of Fathers Incorporated, and I have leaned on him for many, many years to kind of help us in the space of mental health. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But how are you doing, and how's everything? How's the family?
Good morning to you. Good morning to your family. Good morning to your incredible audience. Man, I'm doing well. The family's doing great. We're getting through, this pandemic, doing the best we can. Mm-hmm. But this is about recommitting, recreating, and rebooting right now for all of us.
Absolutely. And now is no more critical time to talk about your work and talk specifically about mental health, because I've been wanting to do something around addressing holiday grief and depression, because this time of year could be really hard for people for a number of different reasons. And next year we have committed as an agency, and I'll talk to you and the other board members about it, for 2023 to focus next year on Cold Blue. Really to begin to look at the mental health of Black fathers and men, and address that as it relates to the families that love them and the families that they care for, and to begin to really put a narrow focus on having more deeper discussions around mental health and Black fathers and Black men. But because of the holidays, why do you think that that grief and depression intensifies during the holidays?
Well, certainly we know that we've lost so many people during COVID, disproportionately affecting Black and brown people. So we will be sitting around the Thanksgiving table, Christmas, Kwanzaa, every holiday that we all address collectively as a people. And there will be so many people who are missing from that table, from that celebration. So that's one of the things that I think we need to look at. The second thing that we have to address is the holidays are tough. A lot of expectations, a lot of pressures to produce and come up with presents, to be able to provide celebrations for all. And so it's especially a very tough time. And for those people who already are dealing with some sort of depression and anxiety. So now they have to rise to the occasion, despite the fact that they're already feeling low and already feeling compromised emotionally. And as we know, Ken, and as I'm sure you've discussed, we've seen record levels of anxiety and depression, as well as PTSD and other mental health challenges because of this COVID pandemic. It's no joke. It's a new normal. It is a culture shock. The world is upside down. And so it can be a glorious time, but it's also going to be a very tough time for a lot of folks.
I think oftentimes that we also misunderstand depression for loneliness, and we'll describe our depression as just being in a state of loneliness, not having people around us. How can one tell if they are entering some level of depression?
If they're sad more days than none, if they're feeling helpless and hopeless, if they're having issues where they're unable to fall asleep, or once they do fall asleep, they're waking up many, many times at night, and not based on age or, the senior years. As we know, we get less sleep as we get older, but really based on the circadian rhythm, which is completely thrown off because of the altered neurotransmitters when one has depression, early morning awakening and not being able to go back to sleep, loss of appetite or overeating, finding that our relationships are very much compromised because we're so sad or we're so angry. Responsibilities. I like to say that get up and go has gotten up and gone. And so, yes, a lot of us have the blues, the holiday blues. We get that. But I think it's also important to point out that if it's something that is so consistent and interferes in our functioning, social, occupational, interpersonal, that we've got to get that checked up. We got to get it checked out, rather.
Wow. How does it look different for men? Because I know it shows up different for men than it does for women. And oftentimes when we think about those kind of general things, I love what you said about the pressures of providing around this holiday season, particularly for non-custodial dads, who have struggled all year with that level of provision, whether it is time, whether it is finances. And this season seems to put a spotlight on that, particularly the Christmas and Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, and those where gift giving is part of the ceremony. And fathers may feel like, they haven't been able to do a great job of that throughout the year. And now all eyes on me. What am I providing? And the anxiety and depression that builds as a result of that spotlight, specifically on provision. But for men, how does this look somewhat different?
Yeah, and it is different for men. A lot of men, their ego and their worth and their self-esteem is tied into their ability to give, to produce, to provide physical things, to be able to make money, to be able to keep their family happy by providing a lot of the things that you talked about, especially if it's a non-custodial dad who now wants to overcompensate by giving their child so much more because they're not with them physically. And so when they're not able to do that, we can see that can add to a depression, that can cause a depression, but men just don't talk about it. It's part of that toxic masculinity that we've talked about before in the past with Fathers Incorporated, where we just feel, that if we reach out, if we talk about that we're feeling this sadness, that we'll be seen as failures or it's some sort of a weakness. And so the stigma is there. For moms, for women, they are much more complex in how they meet the needs of children, and therefore they have a lot more to rely on, especially their maternal instincts and being able to provide that physical love more often than men are socialized to do that. So when we're looking at depression with men in Black men, but men in general, we see that they tend to internalize it. They're much more quiet. And if they're much more quiet, that means that they're probably much more irritable or much more sad because they're eating up a lot of those feelings and not expressing them as a catharsis, as a way to reach out and be sociable, connect the dots with others.
Yeah, typically folks don't think about dads who don't have access to their children as a reason for depression, right? They don't think that. They
Right.
think that just because they do not have their kids, that somehow they just gloss over the holidays and cruise through without any emotions and thoughts about, sitting there on Christmas Day or holiday there on a holiday with their family and being very acutely aware that their children are not there with them and they're with someone else, and that bonds and memories are being created without them. And that's something that they're going to have to reconcile with when their children gets older and wonder why you weren't around on Christmas
Right.
Day or why you weren't around on the holidays. Why is it so important for us to get people to recognize that that's an issue for fathers?
Because we need to give them as much support as possible. We have a lot of prejudices and stereotypes in our society. We tend to see that fathers, or tend to believe or perceive without any facts, that fathers who do not have custody of their children must be deadbeats, or they're not around, or they're not really trying. And in fact, we know with the great work of Fathers Incorporated, for those dads perhaps who may be lacking in some of those skills, we're beefing them up, we're giving them support, we're giving them empowerment strategies. For those dads who are already doing that, we are giving them much, much more support and reinforcement. And something that you and I have always talked about, that we have to give fathers and mothers, of course, but in this case, fathers, the benefit of the doubt. It's not that they don't want to be with their children. There may be some, domestic situations of where, they have fallen out of favor with their kids. There may be some parental alienation. Perhaps they have some mental health challenges that have prevented them from being good fathers, or there may even be some physical barriers: going to prison, going to, the military, or going to war, or living in another town. And yes, we have to say that there are fathers who have come up short, but we should leave no father behind, and work with every father, because it's not just about the fathers, it's most about the children.
Absolutely. And, and that's where I kind of land in this conversation, because some years ago, I began to not pick up a challenge that I wanted to pose towards SAMHSA, as it relates to ACEs, their
Mhm.
adverse childhood experiences. And I really believe to this day that fatherlessness should be an ACE.
Yes.
That it is an adverse childhood experience with long-term traumatic impacts and effects. That's very different from the other ACEs, very different from particularly the incarcerated parent one and the separated parent one, that this issue of fatherlessness in our children is something that has to be addressed very specifically, not only because of dad and mom, but because of what the impact has on children, because whatever is happening throughout the holiday season between mom and dad, children are in full view of it. They see it,
Yeah.
even if they don't know how to articulate it. They understand, and I always like to use the term spidey senses. Their spidey senses tell them that something is wrong, because men in particular have a ability to set the temperature in the room. I always tell folks that in my family, I'm the thermostat, not the thermometer, right? When I walk into the door, depending on what my temperature is what the temperature of the house becomes, much more than my wife. My wife can come in and have an impact on the temperature in the house, but mine is very noticeable. Like if I walk in the door and I'm happy, hey, how you doing? What's going on? Well, everybody's energy goes up. But if I come in the door quiet, don't talk to anybody, on occasion not kiss my wife and go straight to the room, everybody's like, something's going on with him. Let's keep it down a notch, until he gets himself together and comes back out, and impacts the temperature, of the room that way. Which leads me to the impact that the holidays has on relationships, because we don't talk enough about that. And even though, fathers who are non-custodial and not with the mom of their child, they still have to maintain a level of relationship to co-parent. What does the holidays do to relationships in the area of depression?
Well, one of the things that we tend to see is if there is a custodial issue, if the parents are separated, it becomes even more exaggerated. And we saw that happen in COVID, by the way, right? Where whomever was supposed to have a visitation with the child didn't see the child for months, if not a year or 2 years or what have you. So it certainly made that situation much, much more difficult. I hope in this season, in this holiday season, that because things have abated somewhat with COVID, that perhaps the visitations will be much more equitable, that perhaps there'll be much more cooperation between the parents. But look, let's face it, we talk a lot, Ken, about this issue of support animals, okay? Mm-hmm. And, we all need that, living, breathing thing that gives us some sort of purpose that we can connect to. It's unprecedented, the number of support animals, but let's take that many notches above. Let's talk about our children. Our children are our support beings. And so if someone has depression or they're dealing with some other sort of mental illness, in addition to the depression, that can make it much worse if they're not seeing their child, if they're not having the support of their child, the physical contact, emotional, visual contact with their child, just being sitting in the same space. Zoom is cool,
right.
Meetings, on video are cool. But for this particular kind of a situation, for someone with a depression, especially if we're talking about a parent who does not usually have custody, now with the holiday season, it's much, much more important that they be able to connect, because it is a time of celebration and Thanksgiving, and certainly being appreciative, grateful for those things that are important to us in our lives, and that is our family and our children.
Yeah, during COVID, I actually developed a small 3-module presentation or training, if you will, that I just was thinking about, and I actually created it. Have not done anything with it since then. I probably did 3 or 4 different sessions of it online. And it was called Parenting Under Crisis. And it was literally a 3-module training, just really talking to parents about the things to be mindful of during this time or that time of intense COVID.
Right.
One of the things that I talked about in there was the need to be able to figure out how to live both together and alone under the same roof. Right. And so, because we tend to, when we talk about these issues as it relates to fatherhood, we tend to talk about the non-custodial parent or dad. And we don't talk about the married dads. We don't talk about the in committed relationship dads, the resident dads, the ones that are living as couples, they're just not married, as though we don't have issues, right, underneath our household. And this whole notion of living both together and apart in my house was having to figure out how to intensely live with my 2 boys, my wife, and our support animal. We got a Doberman during that time that is, now a 85-pound ball of muscle around the house that, brings level of joy in the house. But at the same time, finding our moments to be apart and being blessed enough to be in a house to which we could be apart and not have to see each other or be in each other's space. And that also being therapeutic and being great for all of us, because it gave us the flexibility of kind of moving in and out. But what it reminded me of, Dr. Jeff, is that 1-bedroom apartment that I grew up in Crown Heights, where if my mother was
which by the way is going for about $5,000 a month. But go ahead.
Absolutely. Which when my mother was in the kitchen on the phone with the long cord, the tangle cord in the kitchen on the cord,
right.
And my brother and sister and I was in the bedroom talking, we could hear her conversation and she could hear our conversation. That's how tightly corded we were. And I wonder for dads that, are together, that are married dads, is there a level of depression that they also need to be mindful of during the seasons that they might not even see or describe as depression?
Yeah, I think it's very important for us to acknowledge that there is something that we call the holiday blues. And this is something that can be a very mild sort of depression. I even hate to call it depression, but it's more of an extended or somewhat serious sadness that happens because they feel that perhaps, as we talked about earlier, that they can't meet certain responsibilities, economic issues coming up. But it's important to know that if we have a couple that are living under the same roof and there is a depression that is not diagnosed, we see that it impacts the relationship. We may see it as irritability. We may see it as being unreasonable. We may see it as perhaps we feel that the person is not romantic or committed. And so that's why it's very important that we diagnose that depression, be able to get that therapy if they need the medication, whatever the case may be, because that undiagnosed depression for that dad in this particular case will certainly impact the relationship. And being in close quarters, not everyone is as lucky as you or I or some of the other dads that we may be living in a larger home and, can, get some downtime and work out some issues and, other parts of the home, especially in a smaller home. We're talking about a boiler maker, if you will. And I'm not talking about the drink here, where that depression and how it affects the partner and the children becomes much more intensified.
Mm-hmm. What is the difference between, because sometimes people interchange these two terms, and I know that there is a difference between stress and depression.
Mm-hmm. Well, stress would be the pressures, if you will, in the simplest terms, the responsibilities, the things that we have to react to, these are demands that are either severe or mild, that push us to respond and that we should be responding to. And too often we don't respond in a healthy way. But stress can be our friend in that it forces us to stand and deliver and do the things that we should be doing. Whereas with anxiety, this is more of a condition of nervousness, hypervigilance, and anxiety in its own way can be good because we're scanning to see what are the dangers, the fight or the flight. But when we can't turn off that anxiety, it begins to wear us down emotionally and physically. And then we should know that even though there's a difference between the two, as you correctly pointed out, they also intersect in many ways. Stress can cause anxiety, and anxiety can cause us not to react to stress in a healthy way.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, I think it was when we did Spit and Anger, or maybe when I interviewed you for Spit and Anger 2, which is something I got to get back to at some point with respect to fatherlessness and women and girls. But you described me as a highly functioning individual, and you were saying, oh, it was Spit and Anger. We were talking about how you said to me that, even folks that are highly functional like yourself can misinterpret where the impact or stress of fatherlessness is having an impact on your life. And it always reminds me that, sometimes when, I'm overstressed, right, that we can sometimes miss the fact that we might be depressed because folks like you and I who do function very highly and move a lot of things around and multitask will look at depression as just multi-level stress.
Right.
And we'll describe it as that. And we won't say, we won't describe the fact that I just sat and watched 8 hours of New York Undercover, on Amazon Prime, as taking it down. And it's really not taking it down. It's just a moment of me not being able to move.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I think we, especially type A personalities like yourself, to some extent, me, we have to be really, really careful that we're not overfeeding on that stress, and actually even being addicted to it, right?
Wow.
Going, because when we begin to ratchet things down, then we have to deal with the anxiety, then we have to deal with the depression, then we have to deal with life on life's terms. So yeah, we just keep going and going and going and going, because we're running away from some of the deeper things that we have to address. And what's really interesting here, Ken, is that we can be so successful at doing that, and be seen as a success in everyone else's eyes. But inside, we know that there's something missing. We know that there's something that needs to be addressed. We're taking care of everyone else, but we've got to begin taking care of ourselves.
Absolutely. How does one begin to start thinking about understanding that they may need therapy and then actually walking into the process of seeking therapy?
Sure. Well, I think we don't really even need to get a signal or have a cause for it. Therapy is a great thing. Just going in and sitting down and talking to someone about how you're feeling, talking to someone about your dreams and goals, talking to someone as to what ails you, working through the ACEs that we talked about, just having someone who can listen to you, who can give you coaching, who can give you empowerment strategies, who can allow you to have the catharsis of getting a lot of the thoughts and the pain and, even the joy to be expressed. If you have an opportunity, if anyone has the opportunity to do therapy, to do counseling, I would say take it. Don't wait until there's some where you can't function or it has impacted your life in a deleterious way. Use it as an empowerment strategy by itself. The same way that you're doing your tonal and, you're doing your exercises and, your, what's the name of that bicycle thing? I'm forgetting the name.
Your spin classes and all that.
Your spin classes and all of that. You're not doing that in order to just lose weight. You're doing that to enhance yourself. Peloton is what I was thinking.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, we buy those things to make us stronger. Well, why not use therapy, not just to address the traumas, but to make you stronger? It's just, working that psychological and emotional muscle to make you so strong that you can deal with whatever the issues are that come your way.
Okay. The way that we are now receiving medical services because of COVID is very different than the way that we received medical services in the past. And I know you are associated with a company, think you still are, but I want you to talk a little bit about, this whole new era of what is being described as telemedication. Right? Or teller services. Talk just a touch about how should we approach those things and how we should have comfort that those things will actually work as opposed to walking into a building and seeing a doctor.
Well, some people really like sitting with someone and it's, and that's great too. Absolutely. But the reality is, we have a shortage of therapists right now, and it's very important that we take advantage in any way we can. And telepsychology is something that is, necessity is the mother of invention. We had it before COVID when we couldn't get to the offices and we had to isolate and be careful. Now it has come to fruition. Look, if you don't have to travel 2 hours or 2.5 hours or 30 minutes or whatever the case may be to get to your therapist, you can just click a button. And by the way, we don't have to wear masks, because of fear of COVID or what have you. And we can connect in that way through telepsychology. Why not do it? Listen, I really believe in saving time, and the commutes are very, very difficult. I know for every single one of my patients that I'm working with, what may be missing as far as being in person, we more than make up for it in reading each other's faces, but most importantly, to have a consistency in therapy, because it's not about wasting time with commutes, with traveling, with having to wear masks, with being in a waiting room. Just roll out of bed, hit the button. Hello there. There's your therapist.
Is Google the best way to find resources?
I think it's an excellent way to find resources, and certainly you can go to many. I'm not going to endorse any particular websites, but you can go to many websites that will help you find a therapist. Right now, there may be a bit of a wait, but if you look and you scour long enough, if you can look for Atlanta Falcon tickets, if you can look for New York Giants tickets, New York Jets tickets, you can find a therapist. I'm sure you can, but you've got to be diligent.
Absolutely. Dr. Jeff, let's give everybody how to get in touch with you, how to find you, and I can get you out of here.
Yeah, absolutely. All you need to do is go to my website, drjeffgardere.com. That's DRJEFFGARDERE.com. Or, as you mentioned, you can go to Google and it'll give you all my information. It'll just pop right on up.
Dr. Jeff, thank you so much. I love you to death. And as Bishop Ferg always said, there's absolutely nothing you could do about it.
Well, listen, I love you too, brother. And I just want to say one thing. What the audience doesn't know is that it takes a very special person to have a Doberman Pinscher. You're one of those very special people. The Doberman Pinschers are one of the most glorious breeds in the world today. I actually had Doberman Pinschers for many years. So, I so appreciate that you have one and you've made it a family dog.
Thank you so much. You take care, sir, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, we'll talk. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. You've been listening to I Am Dad Podcast. We hope that you have been informed, encouraged you to think, or even inspired your heart for the love of dads. The conversation does not end here. Come back and join us next week. Same time, same place. Or you can continue the dialogue on our I Am Dad Facebook page. We also invite you to listen to past episodes, learn more about us, and keep up with special activities by visiting IamDadPodcast.com. That's IamDadPodcast.com. Until next time, I leave you with this reminder of manhood from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Because of this reminder, I will always understand that I am dad, period.